I want to go back live now to Parliament. It's been a busy day in the National Assembly. The Deputy President, David Mabuza, has been answering questions in the National Assembly. Later, the House will also debate and vote on the new proposed minimum wage. eNCA's Lester Kiewit joins us now. Lester, good afternoon to you. Let's focus on land first as far as the Deputy President is concerned, also alluding to the fact that state land could also be expropriated. What did he say?
That's right, Jeremy. There was a question by MPs to the Deputy President, asking him for some clarity on his thoughts on the process that will happen in terms of to identify whether Section 25 of the Constitution will be changed on the question of land expropriation without compensation. Now, the Deputy President then clarifying in the question, in his answer, that this is an ongoing process. A panel will also be appointed by the President. This will run parallel to a parliamentary process to look into this land question. But the Deputy President saying that it's not only private individuals' land that could also be expropriated. He says if this motion or this plan is then passed, that also state land, land owned by government departments as well as municipalities, could also be expropriated, especially if they intended for land use by South Africans, particularly in the agricultural sector. So some clarification there from the Deputy President. This also then sets to mind many people whose mind has been at unease that there could be plans for wide-scale land expropriation, particularly with commercial land. But the Deputy President saying that their plan is to put all South Africans, particularly in rural areas, to work, that even a government land, state-owned land, could also be expropriated if people plan to use that, particularly for agricultural purposes.
Let's move away from the Deputy President a little later, if it hasn't begun immediately. In fact, I'm just seeing to the monitor on my right, the Deputy President is still talking. But a little later, the big debate is around labour legislation, particularly regarding the minimum wage. It has its supporters and detractors, but set this debate up for us and obviously the vote later.
It's this key, and one would argue, a historical legislation which would be debated in the National Assembly later this afternoon and this evening. Various labour bills to be discussed. Top of mind, of course, is the minimum wage bill, which has been going through various processes over the last few months and years, coming through NEDLAC, being discussed within parliamentary committees. Many people on the side of organised labour, particularly in COSATU, saying this could be a victory for workers, with that minimum wage being set at 20 Rand an hour, putting the wages of millions of South Africans up there. Now, we do know that the ANC caucus does support this bill with its parliamentary majority, or the National Assembly majority of 62%. It's quite likely that this bill will be going through unopposed or with very little opposition, I would argue, in the National Assembly. But that does not stop there. We do know that the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, says it will be challenging this minimum wage. We're still planning various marches and organised protests to Parliament, even possibly going to court to try and stop this bill. But from a government side, from the ANC caucus side, saying that this would be a victory for workers, this minimum wage legislation being set the first in South Africa's history. And many have argued that this is a monumental time for South Africa, with particularly COSATU calling this minimum wage bill historic, and of course saying that it is revolutionary.
All right, Lester Kiewit in Parliament, thank you very much indeed, or outside the National Assembly, and we will take aspects of that debate a little later when it begins. As I mentioned to you, the Deputy President, David Mabuza, is still addressing the House at the moment.